All right, friends, I'm gonna get started because a minute passed and I'm loud. So if I start moving, then people looking for us will be able to hear me and go, there's my loud teacher. Um, so thank you. I'm sorry for playing round and around and around with technology today. Hopefully that's not gonna be an issue. I plan on being in 2030 where we've been. IT is in there working their magic, so hopefully they can figure it out. My solution was I just couldn't get the computer to turn on, which feels silly. Like I'm hoping all they have to do is like plug something in and it'll magically work. But I am not tech savvy, so I called the authorities. So where we left off, we were talking about some good representation of Native Americans. Some other good examples. If you're interested in TV shows, there's a show, I believe it's on Netflix now, Dark Winds. It's kind of like a gritty crime drama. So if you like Law and Order, CSI, things like that, it's kind of along that scene. The one that didn't last very long was Rutherford Falls. I think it only lasted one season. It was kind of like Parks and Recreation, but they had a lot more Indigenous representation. Parks and Rec had some decent, I enjoyed Parks and Rec as a show, and they had some decent representation, but this had a little bit more, but it just didn't take off. If you're looking at movies, two movies I recommend. Real Injun is a documentary. It basically follows an Indigenous documentary filmmaker as he travels the US interviewing Native Americans, both nobodies you've never heard of and big names you may recognize from Hollywood. He basically talks to different Indigenous people about like, what was it like growing up as an Indigenous person, seeing us represented in Hollywood as usually the bad guys in like Cowboys versus Indians or, something like that. My absolute favorite from that movie, I need to rewatch it, but one of my favorite scenes is he talks to a couple of elders, two older men that were in an old Hollywood Western back in the like 60s. And when they were filming the Western, the screen artists, like the screenwriters, that's what it's called, nobody wrote them lines. They basically would just say, hey, the white person's going to say their line in English, and then we'll point to you and, I don't know, say something in your language. Didn't bother teaching them. And they had some fun with it because they thought, you're not going to bother translating. We're going to say whatever we want. So in the scene, the way it plays out, if you don't speak their language, is some Union soldier tells these older Indigenous men, you need to leave this area, blah, blah, blah. And the two men say something in their language, and the subtitles in English say something like, oh, yes, we'll move soon, blah, 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 whatever. In reality, when they're speaking in their language, what they're actually saying about this soldier, it's an actor, but the soldier, what they're saying, excuse my language, is he's no better than a snake crawling in his own shit. What does he know? What is he talking about? And I love that for years, nobody knew except for people that speak that language. And I'm like, that's a good way to get them to be like, maybe if you wrote us some lines and did some work and translated this, you wouldn't have that issue. The other movie is Smoke Signals. This is a fictional story, but it shows some really good representation. It is based off of a book by Sherman Alexie, a really great Indigenous author. It does have a lot of humor, a lot of really funny moments. It does also touch on some heavy topics like suicide, poverty, things like that. So I don't want you to think it's a laugh riot from beginning to end. There are some serious scenes. Adam Beach, he was on Law and Order SVU for a season, if he looks familiar to you. If she looks familiar in the center, when I first watched this movie, I thought, she looks a little familiar, but not that much. Excuse me, but her voice was very familiar. So I looked her up. She's the voice of Disney's Pocahontas. And they actually used her face for some of Pocahontas's renderings. So I was like, oh, that's why she looks and sounds so familiar. I grew up with her. Like, oh, that's why. But really, really good movies. So what I was going to end on, because we only had a couple slides on Native America left. How can you continue to be a good ally? Continue your education. Pay attention to things that are going on with the Indigenous community. Look into the indigenous community in your backyard. Not literally in your backyard, that'd be weird, but I don't know where you live, maybe. But no, the people that live near you, pay attention to their traditions, their stories. Um, if you are somebody that likes getting into activism, going to protests, there are usually protests happening in Indigenous America, usually around things like pipelines. Celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day over Columbus Day. That is something that goes back and forth in our country because when we had some people in charge, they said, hey, Columbus Day is kind of a misnomer. Columbus didn't really discover anything. And realistically, if we look at the history, he did more harm than good. So maybe we should instead celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And we did that for a few years. And then our current president said, absolutely not, it's Columbus Day. So now we have half the country saying it's Columbus Day, half the country saying it's Indigenous Peoples Day. Regardless, you usually get a day off from classes. I'm not going to police you. If I hear you say it's Columbus Day, I don't like manifest and yell at you. And I'm like, no, but I celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Protect their and respect their traditions and trades. If possible, shop Indigenous. So if you like something like a dream catcher, you are allowed to own a dream catcher. There's no rule against that. But I would recommend finding an Ojibwe artist online or going to a local powwow to buy that dream catcher. I see them all the time for sale at Five Below. Dream catchers are supposed to be a spiritual tool. I would argue, you can argue against me, but I would argue mass-produced Technicolor dream catchers are not going to be as spiritual as one that was specifically made with the goal in mind. And if you can, I recommend attending a local powwow. Unfortunately, I don't think there's many in Muskegon. So your next closest bet would probably be Grand Rapids, which I know, depending on whether or not you have a car, that's a pretty long journey if you don't have a car. So I understand not being able to go, but if you can, there's one in the spring. It usually happens early June, and one in the fall about mid-September, early mid-September. They're free to go to. You don't have to be Indigenous to go. They just ask that you're respectful. So don't take pictures of people without their permission. If you want to compliment someone's outfit, you can call it either an outfit or regalia. They are not costumes. Costumes are something you put on to pretend to be somebody you're not. In this instance, they're not pretending to be Native American. They really are. And I mentioned, ask before you take pictures. Now, a powwow is not the same thing as, say, a Comic-Con. Comic-Cons are where you actually do dress in costume and pretend to be somebody else. But where I say there's a slight similarity is, if you go to like Grand Rapids Comic-Con and you see somebody in an amazing, I don't know, Zelda outfit, and you go, wow, that's a cool outfit. You put a lot of work and effort and money into that. If you go up to them and compliment them and say, love your Zelda outfit, can I take a photo with you or of you? Most of them are going to say, hell yeah, because they worked their butt offs on that costume and they put a lot of money and time into it. Now, while the regalia are not costumes, where I say it's a little similar is the regalia takes a lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of time. So if you see someone in a beautiful regalia or outfit at a powwow, and you come up to them respectfully and compliment them and then ask for a photo, most of them are going to say, hell yeah, I worked my butt off for this. Take a photo of me. I look amazing. So as long as you're respectful, a lot of times you can get really nice photos and you can take pictures with people. Okay. Oh, did I not open it? Good job, Stephanie. Helps if you open the PowerPoint. So I'm going to pull up the traditional medicine PowerPoint. And we'll get into that. So this one is focused more on Galanti, that green book. We're going to read chapter 12 from her. And then this week, we're going to focus on chapters 9 and 10 as well. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit, couple of chapters from that green book, really touching into medical anthropology. And reminder with that book that all of the names have been changed. So, like, she brings up an Indigenous woman named Mary Cloud. That is not her real name. I don't know what her real name is. I did the same with my research. You promise anonymity or being anonymous for safety, because sometimes somebody doesn't want to share a story that happened to them for fear of repercussions. Maybe it's a story about medical anthropology where someone is saying, hey, I went to blank hospital. I had a really bad interaction with this nurse. She treated me terribly. They might not want to say, and my name's Stephanie Seacard, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and that's where I am. Here's all my socials. Because I might fear that nurse might read that story, recognize my name, and go, oh, I just want to say bitch. But like, you terrible person. And like, she comes and hunts me down and yells at me. I don't want that. So we usually change their names so that they feel a little more secure. I am going to bring up an additional article that's listed here by Spickens et al., but I didn't make you read that. I figured you had a lot of reading. I wasn't going to make you read it, but I want to bring it up. So if you ever see, it says Spickens et al. Et al. Is basically an abbreviated Latin term. I always playfully refer to it as and friends. But it's basically when you have a bunch of authors, if you're citing them and there's 20 authors, you can't list all 20. You're going to take up the whole paragraph. So we just abbreviate it to the first person, et al., to mean and others. So this article was called Calculated or Caring: Neanderthal Healthcare in Social Context. And it was authored by 4 different authors, published in World Archaeology in 2018. You don't have to memorize all the authors' names or the publication. I mostly include that so that you know how recent it was, who published it, and if you want to look up the article and read it on your own, now you have the title and the authors, so you can do that. What this basically looks at is archaeologists have been finding evidence that Neanderthals took care of each other. They cared for their sick and injured, or their elderly. Unfortunately, for all of us, we're organic beings. As we aged, parts of our bodies deteriorate. So as we age, you can get things like arthritis, back pain, things like that. Now, that doesn't mean a younger person is never going to have arthritis. I have met people who are like 21 and unfortunately riddled with arthritis. It can happen, but we see it more often in the elderly. So realistically, as we age, we kind of become more, I don't necessarily want to say more disabled, but we would become less able-bodied. So yeah, I guess a little bit more into the disability group. For years, many of us, either anthropologists or non-anthropologists, would depict Neanderthals as very brutish, kind of stupid, and not really capable of caring about other Neanderthals. Thankfully, we have now been finding evidence that that was not really the case. Many Neanderthals took care of each other, and we kind of can look at why they took care of each other. The paper explores whether this was an act of empathy or just a way to minimize the risk of preserving a large group. Bless you. So we know that there's strength in numbers, even though most of us in this classroom are not living as Neanderthals did, living off the land, surviving. We still know there's strength in numbers. We know we have buddy systems, things like that. Neanderthals also knew that. They knew the bigger their group, the more likely they were for survival. You couldn't have a group so large that you couldn't feed them, like 500 Neanderthals, but if you had like 30 to 50, that's a good round number to keep everybody safe. One of the questions the paper asks is, should we assume that Neanderthals acted like modern human beings? Realistically, they are very similar to us, but they did exist, like 40,000 years ago. Very likely they have different brains. They may have had different communities. So it's kind of hard in 2026 or in 2018 to use modern lenses to look at an archaic population. Do not panic about this long list. I'm not going to make you regurgitate this for the final exam. The reason why I included this long list is because I wanted you to know how many ailments this individual had. This gentleman is referred to as one of the case studies from La Chapelle aux Saints in France, I believe. He was found with some other specimens. He was aged between 25 and 40 years old. Realistically, nowadays, in our generation, we usually refer to middle age starting around 40. He would be considered middle-aged, even though we say at most he was 40. For Neanderthals, they had a slightly shorter lifespan than our modern humans. So 25 for him would have been getting into middle age. 25 now is definitely not middle age. Or if you ask my father, he's convinced 80 is middle-aged. I'll refer to myself as middle-aged, and he'll be like, you can't be middle-aged, I'm middle-aged. And I'm like, sir, you turn 80 in October. That is not middle-aged. But this gentleman had a list of health issues, including extensive tooth loss, severe periodontal disease causing that tooth loss, joint arthritis, severe osteoarthritis in his lower and upper vertebrae, moderate to severe degeneration of the lower thoracic vertebrae, osteoarthritis in both shoulder joints. He had a healed rib fracture. He also had degeneration in his hip and foot. So this poor man had a lot of health concerns and was pretty ill. Where this leads us to understand that Neanderthals were taking care of him is if he were out by himself with almost no teeth, barely can walk, can't lift anything, he would not have survived very long because he would have perished. If you can't chew your food, you can't digest your food as easily. So I know it's really, really gross, but the fact that he didn't have teeth means someone was tenderizing his meat for him. And as much as I would love to say that they were taking a mallet and tenderizing it that way, it's very likely they just chewed it for him. And that's where I say it's a little gross. It's a little yucky. You think of pre-chewed food, you think, no, thank you. But if that's your only option for survival, you're going to go with the pre-chewed food. You're going to be like, yeah, it's a little gross, but I trust him. He rinsed out his mouth well. I think it'll be fine. Word. So what can that specimen tell us about Neanderthal empathy? He had frequent flare-ups of painful arthritis. Arthritis is a degeneration in like your joint cartilage. So right now, if you don't have arthritis and you move your joints, they're supposed to move pretty fluidly and not cause any pain. With arthritis, that cartilage breaks down and eventually it becomes bone on bone, and that's where it gets really, really painful. If you've ever seen in a movie or someone in your life who's older and they say something like, oh, it's gonna rain today, I can feel it in my bones, that never made sense to me because I used to think that's ridiculous, you can't feel that in your bones. I fractured my elbow at 14. Now that I'm 42, I tell you what, when it's gonna rain, I feel it in my elbow and I'm like, dang, those old people were not kidding. I really do feel it coming. It's a change in the barometric pressure that can add to swelling of the joints and cause issues. So you really can feel it in your bones. I'm sure this guy could feel it in his bones. He had limited upper body range, making it difficult or impossible for him to carry things. He couldn't walk that well. He had like the rib fractures. Somebody took care of him while it healed. This care for him was most likely costly to the other Neanderthals, meaning it took time, it took planning, it took effort. Things like carrying things. The average day to day, that probably wasn't an issue to him, but Neanderthals were mobile. They were nomadic. They moved from campsite to campsite, meaning if they needed to move him, he couldn't carry any of his belongings. And in fact, in some instances, he may not have been able to walk, which means somebody had to carry all of his stuff and possibly even him. That's costly. That slows the group down. That means less people can carry less things because they're carrying his stuff, and it takes more time. So what we can see about this is the only goal of his care would have been for his benefit, meaning he wasn't helping hunt, he wasn't helping gather, he wasn't, quote, pulling his weight for subsistence, which means there was something about this Neanderthal man that made him important enough that people said, yeah, I know he can't hunt, I know he can't take care of himself, but we're going to keep him around. We're going to take care of him. Unfortunately, because we don't have time machines, we're never going to know 100% for sure why this man was deemed savable. But something about him for the group, they basically decided that his care was costly, but it was worth it. So that gets us thinking, what are some reasons why they might keep this man around if he doesn't, quote, pull his weight? One, maybe he was a leader. Maybe he was a higher up. Maybe they had like a ranking system and he was in charge and they thought, yeah, he's not lifting things, but he's in charge, so we're going to keep him around. Maybe he was just beloved. Maybe he was a really good storyteller. Maybe after a rough hunt, after a rough day of foraging and hunting and coming back to the campsite, maybe this guy always had the best stories and everybody loved sitting around the campfire with him. Maybe he was a prolific father. Maybe he had a whole bunch of kids, and because of family lineage, they all took care of grandpa. Realistically, even in our own families, sometimes we end up with family members that we love dearly, but we don't really hang out with, like we don't really get along with. I think I have family members that they're my family, like cousins that I love, they're my family. I don't want any harm to come to them, but we don't really get along. We don't really hang out. Like, we're friends on Facebook. That's about it. I'll hang out with you if you come to town to visit other people, but we're not hanging out. We're not talking on the phone every day, but I still care about them. So it could have been something like that. What it really does give us a glimpse in is that Neanderthals had enough empathy to take care of each other, to say, hey, I know you have an injury that's temporary. Let me bring you your food while you heal. Let me do the hunting for you. You have an injury that's chronic, that's going to flare up, and you're having a bad arthritis day. Don't worry, I'll carry your stuff. So it clearly shows us that his group cared about him. I can't guarantee everyone in the group. There probably was some naysayer that every time somebody was like, oh, we got to carry Uncle Jim, there was probably one guy that was like, just leave him. But realistically, as a group, they cared enough about him to keep him around. I'm never going to make you memorize an entire quote. So this is just a nice quote from the article to sum it up. A social perspective on Neanderthal healthcare contributes to our understanding of Neanderthals as living in groups with deep investments in each other's well-being and with a competence to apply knowledgeable approaches to preserve health. Basically saying that, yes, this shows us that they had empathy. It also shows us they were smart. They were smart enough to locate and use medicinal herbs, to use things like a sling for a broken arm, to use things that we now still use. And some of these traditional medical practices are still being used around the globe today. So it shows us that they were more empathetic than we originally thought and probably a lot smarter. They knew the plants and animals in the area. They knew what was beneficial and what was helpful. Now I'm going to get into Galanti. I just a couple of short little slides on that article because it's a good one. So looking at traditional medicine, Galanti also brings up Neanderthals, So, one of the things that we talked about when I spoke about religion and we talked about Neanderthals is that they buried their dead. So, they lived between like 65 and 40,000 years ago, give or take. Um, their burials show not only that they took care of their dead, but a lot of their burials have also shown us healed injuries where they understood that like a broken bone was temporary as long as you took care of it. So they knew if I broke my femur, I'm going to be down for the count for a while. I'm not going to be able to lift. I'm not going to be able to hunt. I can't chase children, things like that. But they also knew how to get me medicinal things to help ease the pain. They knew that they had to keep my legs straight so that it healed properly, so that I could rejoin the group and be a functioning member. They knew to take care of each other. For many, many years, Western medicine or biomedicine had really dismissed traditional medical practices. So things like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. For many, many years, Western medical professionals would say, oh, that's primitive, that's behind us. We're only going to focus on advances in Western medicine. Thankfully, as you will kind of see today, we're now finally understanding like, hey, traditional Chinese medicine has been around 3 or 4 thousand years. And if it's been around for thousands of years, it's probably because it works. It's probably because it has benefits. So thankfully, a lot of Western medicine is finally starting to look at traditional medical practices and look at, okay, let's not poo-poo it. Let's say what's working and can we use that in our medical practices as well? I'm going to go over a couple of folk remedies. Depending on your career you're going into or currently into, this may be beneficial. If it doesn't help with your career, it's just interesting. But one of the first ones is called coining or coin rubbing. It's basically where you take a metal coin. Sometimes, if you don't have a coin, you can use a spoon, but it has to be metal. You heat it up a little bit, and then you anoint it with herbs and oil. Then you take the afflicted person, and let's say, like the person on the slide, that's somebody's chest right up here. So realistically, that person may have gone to their doctor, to their healer, and said, hey, I'm having a lot of tightness in the chest and a cough. And this is the doctor trying to figure out what's causing the cough and how to get it out of you. The goal of coining is that you rigorously rub down the body part that's afflicted. And the goal is to draw out the illness with that vigorous rubbing. The red marks are said to only appear on somebody who is ill. So if you're complaining about like tightness of the chest and you go in and you do this and you don't get any red marks, the doctor would then probably say, okay, this isn't a physical ailment. This might be a mental ailment that's causing tightness of the chest, which realistically, we know things like anxiety and stress can cause tightness of the chest. So that might be the issue. The reason why I'm showing you photos of this is depending on what career you're in, you might be a mandated reporter, meaning if you suspect abuse, you have to legally report it. I show this photo because if you've never seen coining, it could look like abuse because it looks like welts or injuries. So let's say you're a daycare worker and you have a little kid come in and he's getting situated and he moves his shirt and like on his back you see these red marks. If you're not used to coining or using a spoon, it looks like abuse. It looks like somebody hurt this little kid. And our gut reaction might be, oh my God, who hurt you? That's where we need to dig a little deeper. Talk to the little kid. Maybe you find out this little kid is Vietnamese American and grandma just came over from Vietnam. She is old school Vietnamese. And you talk to the little kid and you say, hey, you've got some marks on your back. And he says, oh, yeah, I had an my back hurt and grandma did this thing to me to make me feel better. If he's like 4 years old, he's not going to know all of the ins and outs, but he's going to tell you who did it and why. Little kids, for the most part, um, will tell everybody's business. Sometimes it's fun if you're the daycare worker. I'm not even kidding. One time I literally worked at a daycare and the little kids, I was welcoming them to the classroom for the day. And I'm like, hi, Timmy, how are you doing? How was your weekend? And Timmy's like, daddy slept on the couch because mommy's mad at him. And I'm like, cool, didn't need to know that. So realistically, if you ask a little kid, what's that mark on you? They're probably going to tell you. If it's something where he consistently has those marks over and over and over again, then yeah, I would say that's when we talk to grandma or we talk like, what's going on? What's happening? This is repetitive. But if it's just a one-off thing, it was most likely old school Vietnamese grandma trying to cure him and draw the illness out. A similar concept, but different technique is cupping. This is where you take a heated glass cup or jar and place it on the body over the afflicted area. What it does is that heat, as it cools, draws the skin up into the jar like a vacuum. Similar concept to coining. The idea is that sucking the skin up, drawing it up, will draw the illness out of the body into the jars. I will let you on your own Google image search. I found the image that was the least painful looking. Some of them look very painful because the skin is really, really raised up. I will let you Google that on your own if you want. It's like 10:30 in the morning. I didn't want to be like, here's a jarring photo. No pun intended, jarring. Yeah.
I've tried cupping. I really love it. You can get a digital cupping machine. So it's just a little thing and you just stick it on. It feels like really deep pressure massage.
Yeah, it entertains me that you look at this as like, oh, traditional medicine, this is so different. But we now finally have figured out that this does actually help with like sore muscles, respiratory issues, and it really can help offer some alleviation to pain and problems. So now it's now left the traditional medical concept and now is constantly used in like spas and sports therapy. So you see it a lot with like athletes with really sore muscles will get this done. Where it can look confusing if you've never seen it before, I'm saying this playfully, not in a dismissive way, but if you've never seen it before, it kind of looks like you've gotten a fight with a giant octopus because of the big tentacle suckers, because you can have these giant red marks all over like your back or your chest or your arm. Basically, the reason why the marks happen, feel free to laugh at me, but it's basically the same concept as a hickey. It's the sucking on the skin causes like issues with the blood vessels and can leave a red purple mark. So similar kind of idea, you're drawing the illness out. Now, do I know medically, is it actually going to draw out the illness? Like if I have the flu and I do this, and then is my flu virus going to be trapped in a little cup? Probably not, but it is helping. It's helping with respiratory issues, it's helping with muscles, it's helping with some other issues. The idea is it only hurts if you have an issue in that area. But yeah, when I looked up images, there were a few that I was like, oh, that looks painful. Maybe it helps, but it looks painful. Yeah.
If I can add something even grosser, it's kind of niche and I don't know if it's legal everywhere, but there's a form of this that actually combines acupuncture.
Oh, yeah.
It's called wet cupping. And
I've heard of that, yeah.
In the blood, you can see little crystal from like if your muscles are really tense.
It's amazing.
I've heard it's really good, but it kind of freaks me out.
Yeah. I bring up bloodletting in a few sentences. It's
no. My other favorite. No.
Now, medications. We've probably all taken medications before, but our medicines in the West are usually in pill form. We like to turn things into pills. Even things that are plants, we then dehydrate, turn into a powder, and turn into a pill. If you go into the medical field you need to know that traditional medicines are usually applied directly to the area of infection versus medicines that we see in the West, pills, we normally take orally. I say normally because heads up, there are suppositories and those are not as fun. Most of our pills, though, we take by mouth. We can't assume a patient knows what to do with them. This is kind of a funny story because it didn't happen to us. Two different stories, one from Galanti, one from TikTok. Galanti shares the story of a woman that didn't understand the birth control pill was taken orally. Standard birth control pills, you get 28 days at a time. Every day you take your pill. You're supposed to take it at the same time every day. It works better that way. And the goal is that it prevents, I believe it actually, I'm not an expert, but I believe it actually prevents ovulation, which will then prevent birth. We know in the West, if you're given a pack of pills, most of us already expect, okay, I'm going to take one by mouth. We might read the instructions or we might just say, one by mouth, that's how it normally works. This woman came from a traditional medical system where things were applied directly to the area it needed to affect. So she, I believe, ended up pregnant, and her doctor said, hey, I prescribed you birth control pills. Were you taking them? And she said, yeah, I took one every day. And he said, weird, not sure how you ended up pregnant. Explain to me how you took them. And she said, every day I inserted one vaginally. And he said, oh no. And I can't fault her. In her logic, she thought, what's the fastest route to my uterus? Right up there, problem solved. Can't fault her too bad, but that's how you end up pregnant. There is a woman on TikTok who is a pharmacist or pharmacy tech. She shares funny stories, never shares photos or names or anything like that. But it's just a lady on TikTok, so I don't know how accurate it is. But she told of a story because your birth control is 28 days. She had a woman come in after 14 days looking for a refill. And she said, hey, you're a couple weeks early. And she said, well, I'm out of birth control pills. She said, huh. And a lot of times medical professionals will try to they don't want to accuse you of doing something wrong. So they'll say well, why don't you tell me how you're taking it? And then we can figure out what the issue is. And this woman confidently said, I take one pill every morning, just like you told me to. She said, okay. And then she continued on, and so does my boyfriend. And she thought, oh no. But again, in this woman's logic, she thought, well, if we both take the birth control pill, it'll be doubly as effective. But no, you should not be taking the birth control pill. So as ridiculous as it may seem, because you and I know pills are taken orally, but like I said, even with us, we do have some that look like pills, but they are suppositories. If you've never heard the word suppository before, it means it goes up your butt. I see it most common with laxatives, things like that. Not fun, but I used to work at a pharmacy and I was 18 years old. And I tell you what, anytime somebody got a suppository, I made the pharmacist go talk to them. I was like, I'm not talking to that old man, but I'm not doing it. And he's like, I'll do it. I have the training. I'm like, he's like, you can't make me. Now, if we have folk medicines or folk practices to cure, it makes sense that we also have folk diseases that are, as of yet, not recognized by Western medicine. And one that we see and hear a lot about is the evil eye. Now, full disclosure, a lot of people refer to this pendant, this icon on the screen, as the evil eye or an evil eye pendant. Technically, they are called nazars. While yes, it looks like an eyeball, these are not the evil eye. These are protecting against the evil eye. The concept of the evil eye is found really, honestly, all over the world. Maybe not in every country, but in almost every geographical region, there's some group that practices this or believes in it. It's the idea that I could inflict an evil upon someone, either intentionally or unintentionally. And usually the motive for casting evil eye is envy. So if you get a compliment from someone, you kind of have to discern, did they really mean the compliment or were they being envious? And I would argue a lot of it comes down when we talked about language, a lot of it comes down to like nonverbal communication or physical communication. So, like, if I see you out and about and you just got a haircut, and I say something like, oh my God, your hair looks so good. Did you just get it done? You can probably note, like, oh, she's being genuine. If I see you out with a haircut and I say, oh my God, your hair looks good. I mean, yeah, that's good. You can probably be like, I don't think she likes my hair. Um, or maybe I'm envious. Maybe I'm jealous because I really like your hair. And I'm looking at your haircut like, damn it, why didn't I do that? You could, in this instance, cast evil eye accidentally. So let's say you're scrolling through Instagram and you're looking at a friend's post and they just got back from the Maldives and you're looking at their post and going, must be nice. Wish I could go to the Maldives. Every time I open Instagram, this chick's on a vacation. Must be nice. You could accidentally cast evil eye because you're being very envious. One of the areas where we especially have to be careful is complimenting babies. Many of the areas that believe in evil eye also believe in the theory of limited good, which I'll bring up in a moment. This idea that babies are very, very susceptible to spiritual warfare. If we think about it in the grand scheme of things, without getting into like which religion is correct, many religions believe that babies came from the spirit realm, just like how when we die, we return to the spirit realm. That's where babies come from. So the idea is a baby just got here. They just got here from the spirit realm, meaning they're probably still connected a little bit. We need to be careful around them. They're very susceptible to diseases. Now, realistically, in Western medicine, we do know babies are susceptible to diseases. Their immune systems are pretty rocky when they first get here. How do you protect against the evil eye? There are a few ways. Talismans and amulets are some of the most common. I have a Nazar pendant on my purse that you're never going to see because I'm always looking around this backpack. But it's on my purse. It's very pretty. It's very simple. I like it for the cultural practice. I also think, yeah, maybe I do want to protect myself against the evil eye. I don't want an evil put on me. We see them very commonly. The other one is this hand symbol that also has an eye on it. There are a few other ways to make sure that you're not accidentally casting an evil eye onto someone. One of the simplest ways is to touch them while complimenting them. What fascinates me about that one is in the West, a lot of women, we naturally have been trained to do this. If we compliment someone, a lot of us instinctively reach out and touch them gently. I do that usually to say, this is an intentional, well-meaning compliment. So if I'm talking to a friend or an acquaintance and I really like their dress today, it's instinctual for me to reach out and kind of tap their arm and say, hey, I love that dress on you. It looks amazing. It's kind of an instinctual way to say like, hey, this is genuine. This is a genuine compliment. The ones that are a little gross and are falling out of favor, one is spitting slightly on the person while you compliment them. Now, what's interesting is when I say spitting slightly, I mean slightly. I am not going to like, oh my God, you look great today. Like, no, it's not, not like that. It looks more like, oh my God, you look great today. Tuss, tuss, kind of making that noise with your mouth. Now, I turned away because realistically, making that noise, you're going to have a little spit come out. You're not hawking up a loogie on them. A great example, if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, her family is obviously Greek. When they get married, as she's walking down the aisle, her entire extended Greek family is all going tuss, tuss on her as she walks by. And her soon-to-be in-laws, who are very waspy and conservative, are horrified. They're like, are they spitting on her? They're like, yeah, they are. But what they're saying is, you look amazing. We're all here to celebrate you. None of us wish you any harm. This is our way of saying we genuinely are here to support you. That one's kind of falling out of favor, but you still see it occasionally. The one that's really falling out of favor that you're mostly only going to see with like the little nona, little grandma who's very old school is when you compliment someone, you lick your finger and trace the sign of the cross on them. That, I think, because now we understand germs more, a lot of people are not doing anymore. So realistically, you're probably not going to come in contact with that one. But if you travel like to the Mediterranean, you may see, especially the elders, if they compliment someone, they do a little spit on them. What's interesting is in Mexico, we have the concept of the evil eye. In Spanish, it is mal de ojo, or literally like illness of the eye. This is tied to the concept of the theory of limited good. So basically, a lot of places believe that when babies get here, they have no mistakes yet. You know, they're babies. What could they have possibly done wrong? It's going to depend on your religion, but most people are going to say, it's a baby. What could they have done wrong? So we kind of view them as little paragons of good, little goodness in a little baby. And so we want to protect them. Now, what's interesting is, even in Western medicine, we now understand that babies are really susceptible to germs. That's why babies have this strict vaccine schedule, and why a lot of parents don't want strangers touching their baby. Or sometimes, and some families will argue about this, if your baby hasn't been fully vaccinated yet, sometimes people will even tell close family members, you are not allowed to hold the baby yet. They have not been vaccinated, because we need to protect them. Now, in the US, there are always people that go against this. We usually have a strict no touching other people's baby rule. Part of that is because of germs. Part of it is unfortunately because of stranger danger. There are some people out there that want to harm babies. So because of that, parents become very protective. I think of a colleague of mine who went and did research in rural Mexico, and she was working with another anthropologist that had been there longer. And the research they were doing was about mothers and children. So they were interviewing a lot of moms with families. This woman, we'll call her Mary. Mary was American, born and raised in America. She was used to, you meet somebody's kid, you don't touch them. No touching. So every time she went to a house with this other anthropologist and she'd be introduced to the family, she would say hi to them, she would be friendly to them, but she didn't touch the kids. Then, after a few weeks, she heard a rumor that she hated children, and she thought, oh God, I love kids. Like, where did this rumor come from? And she found out that in this village, at least, the custom is, if I introduce you to my child, you're supposed to pick up my child and love on them and go, oh my God, you're so awesome, and then put them down and go back to whatever you're doing. But most Americans, if you're introduced to a child, we go very formal of like, yes, hello, child, like, because we don't want to pick up somebody else's kid. So then she found out, oh my God, I got to start picking up these kids. So the next time she went to a house and they said, oh, and this is little Jimmy, we're in Mexico, I don't know, Jaime, I'm trying to think of a Mexican name. She was like, give me that baby. Like, let me love on that baby, because I need to prove to you guys that I'm here because I love kids and I want to help. Now, here's a funny one. How did ancient Rome ward against the evil eye? Ancient Rome thought you can't possibly cast the evil eye if you're too busy laughing. Laughter was the best solution to ward off evil eye. Now, where ancient Rome is very much like modern America is, what did they find funnier than anything? Dicks. This is an amulet to ward against the evil eye. It is a penis with legs, with a penis and wings, and a penis coming out of his butt. It is so ridiculous that the goal was, if I saw somebody in this necklace, I'd be too busy laughing my butt off to cast any evil upon them. And the reason why I say that seems very like modern America is you cannot walk through any alley or any bathroom here without seeing somebody drew a dick on something. It seems very human. It's the fact that we can go back thousands of years. You can go to Pompeii, and Pompeii has tons of dick graffiti. They also have great other graffiti. I think my favorite, something that was sort of tied in, something that was practiced in Pompeii, sex workers. Some of them would have sandals that left impressions that say, if you like what you see, follow me. And they would basically just wander through Pompeii or Rome advertising themselves and then leaving little arrows when they walked, like, if you like what you see, follow me. I'm like, that's kind of genius. But yeah, that was their way to protect against the evil eye.
You follow the arrows, well, now this thing is like, what the?
Okay, so not as fun, but getting into traditional healers. Galante brings up the story of Mary Cloud, which of course is not her real name. Mary Cloud was a Cherokee woman who was having bowel obstructions. Now, two things to know. I say the placebo effect with a question mark. If you're unaware of the placebo effect, if medicine is trying out a new drug, they have two groups of people. One group is given the new medicine and the other group is given a placebo or a fake medicine. We do that because we have to monitor whether or not the medicine is actually working. And what's fascinating is we're still trying to do more research into how we could harness this. Not always, but every once in a while, somebody will say, let's say have eczema. And they're, eczema is not life-threatening, but it's annoying. I have eczema. And let's say there's this new miracle pill out to cure eczema, but I get given the placebo. I'm not told you're on the placebo. I'm just told, here's a medicine, tell me if it works. And then what happens is my eczema starts to clear up. And I go back and I report it to the doctor, and the doctor's taking notes like, that is fascinating because you are not on any medicine. Sometimes we have what's called the placebo effect, where our body can naturally start to heal itself just from the suggestion of being on a medicine. It's not like 100% for sure works every time. We're trying to figure out why exactly that happens. The human body is amazing. But the placebo effect is when something that medically shouldn't help still helps. So many Western medical practitioners would say traditional healers aren't really doing anything. They're just kind of easing stress. Mary Cloud's instance, she got rushed to the ER because she passed out. They found out she had a bowel obstruction, which yes, means you have too much poop. But bowel obstructions can be incredibly painful and they can be fatal if left untreated. You need to be able to clean your system out. And if you can't, that can cause issues. So she was in the ER. Usually if you have a bowel obstruction, the first thing they'll do is pump you full of laxatives and hope for the best. When that didn't work, they said, all right, our next best option is surgery. But Mary said, I can't go through surgery yet. If I have to do a surgery, I have to go through a blessing ritual from my medicine man. The problem is her medicine man lived about an hour and a half away, which means what she wanted to do was leave the hospital, get in her car, drive an hour and a half, do the ritual, drive an hour and a half back to the hospital, and then go into surgery. And the doctors were nervous, saying, if we let you out of the hospital, something could go wrong. It might take too long. You could perish. We really should move forward. But Mary was like, absolutely not until this ritual is completed. So where they worked with her rather than against her is they basically brought the medicine man to her. He still had to travel an hour and a half, but at least it wasn't 3 hours. Brought him to her, put her in a private room. There were some parts of the ritual he couldn't do. Like a lot of times in a hospital, you can't have open flames. So it's not like he could light any kind of smoke cleansing or anything like that. But he basically did the ritual with Mary. Then she felt better, went into surgery, and came out of the surgery okay. She lived, she's fine. Where I say placebo effect, is medically, for the medical doctors, they would say that medicine man did nothing. All he did was ease her anxiety. But I would also argue that easing your anxiety helps you in surgery. It helps you go under anesthesia faster, stay under anesthesia. It helps you heal faster. Realistically, Western medicine may say religion or spirituality has nothing to do with healing. But even to bring up my own family history, my mother had a stroke back in the 90s. It was pretty severe, and they told her she was never going to walk again. My mom is one, incredibly stubborn, and two, very Catholic. So my mom said, we'll see about that. And she combined her prayer with her stubbornness, and she was walking. She walked pretty well for the rest of her life. The medical practitioners would probably say her religion had nothing to do with that. But as far as my mom was concerned, her religion was what was giving her strength, giving her that sense of ease. And so realistically, did the medicine man heal Mary Cloud? Probably not according to the doctors. But did he ease her stress, ease her pain, help her feel more confident going into a surgery? Yeah, and that very likely could have helped. Now, looking at traditional medical systems, the first one I have is Ayurvedic medicine. Oh, I'm out of coffee. Right, water. I should hydrate. Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurvedic is a Sanskrit word meaning the laws of health. Ayurvedic medicine is mostly practiced in India within the Hindu faith. And it is very holistic, meaning you focus on the whole person. So if I go to an Ayurvedic medical practitioner and I say, hey, I have stomach issues, they're not going to just say, oh, you have stomach issues? Oh, you probably got IBS, or you got a gallbladder issue. Here's some medicine, take your gallbladder out, problem solved. They're going to say, yes, let's look at your diet. Let's look at your exercise. Let's also look at your spiritual well-being. How's your mental health? Things like that. Now, realistically, I'm going to use myself and I'm going to overshare a little bit. When I was in grad school, I was having tummy problems. I was sick all the time. And I went to my regular Western doctor, and the first thing they did for a few months was rule out all the physical problems. They checked my gallbladder, they checked my intestines, they checked my stomach, they checked all of that. They waited until the absolute last to then say, hey, how's your mental health? And then when I talked to them about, oh, I'm in grad school, I don't know where I'm going to get my next paycheck from, I'm very, very stressed. That's when they finally said, oh, I think you're making yourself sick. Like this is up here that's affecting your tummy. Ayurvedic medicine, they would have looked at that right away. They would have said, yes, let's rule out issues like gallbladder problems or stuff like that. But let's also look at your mental health. Let's look at your spiritual health. It focuses a lot on the 5 elements. For them, they include the 5 elements as earth, water, fire, air, and ether or space. A lot of it is about balance, like the little diagram on the screen. They want you to eat a balanced diet, including the 6, is it flavors they call them? 6 tastes. Sweet, salty, sour, pungent, which looks like spicy, bitter, and astringent. So it's about kind of eating the rainbow, which we realistically do that too. We try to encourage people to eat lots of fruits and veggies. Do we actually eat lots of fruits and veggies? I mean, realistically, not right now because I don't know which ones are going to cause diarrhea. I ate a salad the other day at a restaurant and I was halfway through the salad when I went, oh no, oh, it's too late. I already ate half the salad. So far, so good. So now we're kind of telling people to cook their veggies, but eating a flavorful, colorful diet, making sure that your plate isn't all beige. I have done that before where I've cooked a meal where in my head I think, I've got meat, I've got veggie, I've got potato, this is going to be a healthy meal. And then I serve everything up and it's white chicken with some seasoning, don't get me wrong, but white chicken, potatoes that are kind of white, and then corn. And then I look at my plate and I go, there's just one color. Where's the color? Where's the flavor? Still a delicious meal, but I have that moment of like, well, this is not a very colorful meal. They want the colors. The other traditional medical system that a lot of you have probably heard of is TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine. This has been around for thousands of years. A lot of these medical systems, what you'll notice is there is a focus on balance. The idea being that being out of balance can lead to illness, mental or physical illness. So, with traditional medical systems like traditional Chinese medicine, you oftentimes have symbols like the yin yang. Here you have the yin is female, cold, dark. The yang is male, heat or light. And being out of balance can affect your physical and mental well-being. With the yin and yang symbol, what you can also see is where we say balance is you have to have a little bit of the light in the dark and a little bit of dark in the light, or it just kind of ends up being off balance. Or if you grew up in the 90s, we called them yin yangs. I don't know why we added an extra G. It's not there. Yeah, I grew up thinking it was a yin yang, and then I learned, I was like, oh, it's yin. There is no extra G, sorry. So a lot of it will be about finding balance. What's interesting is this medical practice has been around, or medical system has been around for thousands of years. But nowadays in China, they are also advancing just like us. And a lot of Chinese people live very modern lives, working 9 to 5s, living in a city. Even living in like a big city like Beijing, you can go to a traditional healer that has a little apothecary, looks like something out of Harry Potter, tons of jars of herbs and bits of insects, tons of stuff. And you'll go into this apothecarist and you'll say, hey, we'll say tummy troubles again. I'm having tummy troubles. His tummy's always upset. And what's supposed to happen is that medicine person will talk to you a little bit more, learn about your lifestyle, learn about your life, your diet, things like that. And then they will customize a tea brew for you to take home and drink. And so basically you go into this person that's not a medical doctor, but they know all of the herbs. They're an herbologist. And you go in and you tell them your ailment, and then they go and they say, okay, I have some elderflower and I have some beetle shells. I know you're thinking, I don't want to eat beetles, but if you had a bad enough tummy problem, you might be willing to try anything. All these different things. And he says, here's your little baggie of stuff. Take it home, grind it up, turn it into a tea, brew it, and drink it, and it'll help your tummy issue. A lot of people still do that, but a lot of other people are saying, I don't have time for that. I don't want to grind up beetles. I just want to ease my tummy issue. So now a lot of companies are taking those remedies and mass producing them as like tea bags. So now you don't have to go to the little herbologist. You can just go to your local store and buy a packet of like tummy trouble tea. Some Chinese folks are saying that's great. We need to advance. We need to adapt to the modern world. Others are saying you lose that personal connection. Because realistically, what works for one person's tummy issues may not work for everybody. And a lot of people are saying, no, we need to go back to that little apothecary. We need to go back to having that personal connection. And then we have Hispanic folk medicine. This is really about balance as well. And their balance is focused on hot and cold. Now, where it can get confusing is the hot and cold doesn't necessarily actually equate to real temperature, meaning fruit juice is considered cold, and most of us drink fruit juice cold. But if I take orange juice and heat it up, it still has the cold properties. It doesn't magically make it hot. Foods, illnesses, and emotions are all given either a hot, cold, or neutral property. So the idea is if you're out of balance, it can lead to illness. So if I have been eating a lot of hot foods, doing a lot of hot activities, having a lot of hot emotions, within this Hispanic concept, it says that's going to lead to unbalance. I'm going to become physically or mentally ill. So you want to avoid extremes in diet and emotion. Hot conditions include, but not limited to, hypertension, diabetes, that's not a word, diabetes, and acid indigestion. Now, some of them make sense to me just for the way my brain works. Acid indigestion being hot makes sense. We call it heartburn because it's hot. It burns in your chest and throat. Cold conditions include menstrual cramps, pneumonia, and colic. So the idea is if I came to my doctor here and said, hey, I'm dealing with menstrual cramps, here in the US, they would probably say, take some Motrin, take some Midol, get some rest, get a heating pad, you'll be fine. Drink a lot of water. And in the Hispanic folk medicine, they would probably also say, get some rest and drink some water. But they're going to say, make sure you avoid other cold conditions. Make sure you avoid cold emotions. You want to heat yourself up. I'll bring this up again later this week when I talk about birth. Pregnancy is considered a hot condition. Yes, pregnancy is a hot condition. The problem is prenatal vitamins are considered hot, and food high in protein is usually considered hot. When you're pregnant, two of the things we tell you to eat are prenatal vitamins and foods high in protein. So if you're going into the medical field and you have a Hispanic patient who's pregnant and you say, hey, I'm going to prescribe you these prenatal vitamins, make sure you eat a lot of protein. And she says, that's going to throw me out of balance. Yes, you can say, well, according to medical science, according to Western medicine, that's not a real thing and it doesn't make any sense. But realistically, are you going to completely change her entire belief system overnight? No. So what you can do is say, okay, prenatal vitamins are considered hot. Pregnancy is considered hot. Here's what you can do. When you take your prenatal vitamins, take them with a glass of apple juice. Apple juice is considered cold. It'll balance out the prenatal vitamins and keep you from getting sick. Realistically, a glass of apple juice is going to be helpful for her. That's a nice serving of apples. And it's probably going to taste good and it'll help the prenatal vitamins go down and it helps her feel better. So a lot of what Galanti preaches is working with people rather than against them, knowing that, yeah, if you go into the medical field, you're going to have a lot of science in your background and you're going to know the scientific explanation for things. But arguing with a patient is usually not going to help them. Rather, we can kind of work with them. I'm going to bring up two. One is more entertaining than the other. Two formerly used medical practices. The first one is Coca-Cola. And if you're unaware, you're thinking, Coca-Cola, the thing I get from the vending machine? Kind of. Coca-Cola was invented in 1886. At the time, you didn't have to have medical approval to sell a medicine. You could just come up with something and tell people it was a medicine. A lot of times what we refer to that as is snake oil because that's what a lot of them claimed they were selling was oil from snakes. And you could basically come up with a patent medicine like Coca-Cola and go around selling it, claiming it's going to cure a bunch of issues. The original Coca-Cola in 1886 had wine in it, as well as cocaine and cola nut. Now, what's fascinating to me is the people in 1886 had an issue with the wine, didn't care about the cocaine. The wine was because we had the temperance movement, people trying to abolish alcohol, which they eventually did in the 20s. But at the time, the guy that invented Coca-Cola, the temperance movement said, you can't sell wine, what's wrong with you? So he brought it back to the lab, took the wine out, but it was really bitter. So we added a crap ton of sugar, which gave us that sugary sweet syrup that we know today. What's fascinating is he didn't invent it as a soft drink. It was supposed to be a medicine. What he claimed is that this Coca-Cola medicine could cure anything from morphine addiction to nerve disorders, headaches, and impotence. Basically sold it as Viagra. What fascinates me is, because it was the 1880s, we were also using a bunch of random old drugs for medicine. We had like You would have cough syrup that had like marijuana and chloroform in it. You had like heroin toothache drops. Your baby has a toothache, give them some heroin. Like, we were wild in the 1800s. So it does make me laugh that when he finally started to sell it as just a soft drink, it was basically like an energy drink because people were drinking it and being like, wow, this is great. I have so much energy and pep. And I'm like, yeah, that's the cocaine. That'll do that. Eventually, obviously, they took the cocaine out. They were not the only ones. I learned the last couple of years that 7-Up used to have lithium in it, which lithium is frequently used to treat bipolar disorder. So I kind of chuckle because I think of, in my mind, I'm like, there had to have been at least one poor undiagnosed bipolar person who was drinking 7-Up regularly and their life turned around and they were like, man, I don't know, everything's great. And then 7-Up took the lithium out and they were like, why is my life turning to crap again? Like, oh my God, those undiagnosed people, like, yeah. So yeah, we had some crazy medicines. It was a patent medicine. But now we just, there's no cocaine in it, so it's not as fun. Every once in a while, Coca-Cola comes out with a new flavor, and there's a tweet that goes around that says either put the cocaine back in or leave it alone. Now, I mentioned bloodletting. Oh, bloodletting. So, similar concept to cupping and coining, and where they were on the right track is the medical professionals hundreds of years ago on the right track, understanding that diseases and illness is carried in our blood. That part, yeah, we're right there. The difference is they thought if we let some of the blood out of your body, the disease will also leave. Sometimes bloodletting was done with little incisions, like along the neck. You can see it in not old movies, but movies about the old world, hundreds or so years ago. You'll see it in movies where the idea is we got to let a little blood out. Now, the incisions are bad enough. The one that grosses me out is using leeches. Leeches will suck your blood like a tick. What's fascinating is we used leeches as recently as the 19th century, so the 1800s, and they were used for treating everything from tonsillitis to hemorrhoids. If you are unaware, hemorrhoids are on your booty. I'm pretty sure you would have to be very, very desperate to put a leech down there and be like, go to town, help me out. But I guess if you're desperate enough, you're going to try just about anything. Thankfully, we now mostly understand bloodletting is not really doing anything, but it is still practiced. There are some communities out there that will still practice bloodletting. I don't know that they're using leeches, but yeah, leeches freak me out. This has nothing to do with anything, but if you've ever seen the old movie African Queen, they go in like a swampy area and come out covered in leeches. Traumatized the crap out of me as a kid. I was like, what the hell are leeches? Really creeped me out. Leeches are not an issue in my day-to-day life. Like, I've never, knock on wood, encountered a leech. So now I'm going to briefly get into some activities of daily living in the body. I use Galanti for this reading as well, but I didn't assign it as a necessary reading. So what this focuses on is it mostly focuses on patients under medical care, but realistically, we live in a very diverse nation. So regardless of what job you're going into, even right now sitting in this classroom, we have a lot of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religions, different practices. And as you go into the careers you've chosen, a lot of you are going to work with people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So it'll really help us to understand why people do things differently and how differently. Or maybe if you just travel, like using the bathroom. Bathrooms don't all look the same. Most of these things we either do daily or at least regularly. Eating, bathing, going potty, hair maintenance, and body image. So I'm going to go through each one of those. All of them are influenced by our culture. Back at the beginning of the semester when I talked about universality, eating is something we all have to do. But what we eat, how we eat, and when we eat That's where it can be culturally distinct. So let's look at eating. One of the religious exemptions is within the Islamic faith. If you are Muslim, you celebrate Ramadan. Ramadan is a holy month to remember when Allah, or God, gave the first books of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. If you ever write Prophet Muhammad and you see PBUH, it's very similar to like rest in peace. It's basically just saying like, kind of, we also hear in like the Jewish faith, like may his memory be a blessing, something like it. It's just kind of similar to like rest in peace, but I'm trying to be respectful. So it's a holy month, but the dates move every year. So this past year, they happened in February to March. They'll move a little bit next year. It'll probably be late February to late March instead of mid. What you do during this month is you fast from sunrise to sundown, meaning no food and no water. So obviously we need food and water to survive. So what you do if you're Muslim during Ramadan is you wake up early before the sun rises, you eat a big meal, you drink a lot of water, then you go the whole day with nothing. And when the sun sets, you have a big meal and drink a lot of water. It's great for communities because you gather. Everybody gets together to share a meal because everybody's hungry by the time the sun goes down. So we're going to gather together and build a big meal. The idea is as you go through the day and you feel pangs of hunger, pangs of thirst, moments of, oh, I could really go for a snack, you're supposed to take that little bit of suffering and offer it up to God, to Allah, and say, instead of focusing on the hunger pain I'm feeling, I'm going to say a prayer and focus on the spiritual. Now, if you're going sun up to sundown, where you are geographically and where you are in the calendar year is going to decide how long you have to fast. So fasting in February, much shorter day. Fasting in July, very long day. So you can understand why many Muslim people kind of prefer when Ramadan lands in the winter, because you have much shorter days that you have to go without food and water. Versus July and August, that's a long day. Now, illness or pregnancy can be a reason for exemption because sometimes, especially if we're sick, pregnancy, you have to eat and drink because, you know, you're making a baby. If you're sick, you're constantly told drink lots of fluids. Your doctor doesn't want you going all day without eating and drinking. So if you have a medical excuse, you can sit out Ramadan, but the expectation is that you make it up when you're better. Where I can see that can be an issue is solidarity. If I'm fasting and I'm fasting with my entire family, then as I go through the day and I'm hungry, I can go to my sister and be like, man, I'm hungry. And she can be like, me too. And then we can commiserate and say, okay, let's say a prayer. Let's focus our energy. But if I'm fasting all by myself, and I go up to my sister and say, man, I'm hungry. Well, she is my sister, so she might be a little mean. I was gonna say she wouldn't be mean, but you know, we're siblings. She might be like, that sucks, I'm eating a sandwich, because she's my sister. But realistically, your family isn't gonna wait for you. They're gonna be like, yeah, well, we're eating lunch because we're not fasting. They're not gonna be mean to you, but you're gonna see people eating around you. So I imagine if you have to make it up by yourself, it's probably a lot harder to do. Another religious exemption for eating is within the Jewish faith if you practice kosher Jewish traditions. So not every Jewish person is kosher. Just about every kosher person is Jewish. I was like, there we go. If you've heard the word kosher before and you're not Jewish, you've probably seen it on pickles. There are some pickles that are considered kosher. In order for a food to be kosher, the food needs to be harvested or slaughtered in a kosher method, and it needs to be prepared on kosher equipment. In order for it to be kosher, it has to be given a bath and blessed. So years ago, I had a student who worked at a pickle factory, and I was fascinated because I said, okay, how does it work? What makes the pickles officially kosher? And he said, what happens is every month or so, they close down the factory for a day, give everything a good wash, which you have to do anyway. So he's like, we give everything a good cleaning, but we make sure it's also in the practice of the kosher faith. Then a rabbi comes in and blesses all of the equipment. And I kind of laughed because I was like, how do you get that gig as a rabbi? Like I envision rabbis getting together and one of them is like, oh, I have a temple of, 200 people. Oh, I have this. And I just envisioned some rabbi like, I bless the pickle machines. Kind of a big deal. But that's how they become kosher again. Some of the kosher rules are you cannot eat pork or shellfish. Now, there are religious reasons, but there's also practical reasons. One of the explanations is they want to limit the suffering of animals. They eat animals, but they want to make sure they're not living life just to be slaughtered. Pigs, if you eat them, you're only raising them for meat. We do not drink pig milk. Probably fine, but I don't want to. We don't do that. They don't usually get used for labor like nothing else. Versus a cow, yeah, we'll eventually slaughter and eat the cow, but we can use the cow for labor. We can use the cow for milk. A pig, you're pretty much just raising to be killed. And so within the kosher faith, the idea is that's not a good life for that pig to lead. Shellfish are scavengers. They can carry disease. Pork can cause trichinosis if not taken care of. So realistically, historically, I can see why a group of people may stay away from pork and shellfish from a practical standpoint, not religious. Why you may want to stay away from them. Now, I totally fully understand that shellfish are scavengers and bottom feeders, but in my opinion, they are still delicious with some butter. I don't care. I love when I'm like, ooh, lobster, and someone's like, they're bottom feeders, and I'm like, and they're delicious. If you practice the kosher faith, you cannot mix meat and dairy. So no like cheesy chicken casserole. They have to be separate. If you're eating meat, they have to be killed in a kosher slaughter, usually with a single blow. The idea in a lot of these religions is to limit the suffering of the animal. The idea being, yes, we need to eat animals, but that doesn't mean they need to suffer. And the last of the religious restrictions for eating, this will harken back to when we talked about religion. Within the Hindu faith, they practice that doctrine called ahimsa, which usually bans violence towards any living creature. But cows are incredibly sacred to Hindus. So cows are usually the most revered, meaning one of those instances where if you're a Hindu and you're stranded somewhere and you're starving to death, could you kill and eat a fish or a chicken? Yeah, you may have to say a prayer after, but okay. If you're starving and the only option is a cow, many Hindu people would just starve. They would say, no, the cow is way too well respected and revered. Where it gets interesting is ahimsa says no violence towards living creatures. But there is a growing fracture in India where you have a community of Muslims and a community of Hindus. And the Muslims are saying, yes, we can eat cows as long as they're slaughtered safely and carefully. And the Hindus are saying, no, you cannot eat cows. Killing a cow is the equivalent to killing a human. Where I say we got a little bit of like a loophole, ahimsa says no violence. But for some Hindu people, some vigilantes, they say, well, that's fine, but if I see someone killing a cow, that's the equivalent of killing a person. And if I see someone killing a person, then I should be expected to step in and I can use violence to stop that violence. So you have these two communities, Muslims and Hindus, living together, and you have the Muslim people trying to carefully and consciously slaughter cows, and the Hindu vigilantes saying you should never kill a cow. there have been some human deaths from this, where I say it's a little bit of a loophole. Ahimsa says no violence, but these vigilantes say that's all well and good, but if they're enacting violence against cows that we value and respect, we're allowed to enact violence against them. So it's a real interesting little area of these two groups trying to live in the same geographic area with very different belief systems. I'm going to talk about going potty. So, most toilets in the US, we sit on them. In Asia, most toilets you squat over. So much so that there was like an American fest, I want to say in Japan recently. And what the Japanese people were excited about is the porta potties were American style, where you sit on them. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I've never had to squat over a toilet. If I traveled to Asia and did that for the first time, I would also be like, oh, weird, fun, this is new. So I'm like, yeah, I can see the novelty. Our toilets you sit on, theirs you usually squat over. Now, if you're in the city, they're gonna be like tiled, they're gonna be taken care of. But because they're in the ground and because some people can't aim that well, they have a tendency to get a little yuckier than our toilets, because our toilets are usually very contained. Now, that being said, I have worked enough retail that people still mess it up sometimes, and you have to clean the toilets. But for the most part, we're pretty good at sitting and getting it in the pot. Where it can be confusing is not only do you squat to go potty, a lot of Asian toilets, you don't use toilet paper, you use water. And a lot of Americans are yucked out by that because we've been raised to use toilet paper the entire time. And we think that's the only way to get clean. Galante brings up an anecdote of a Filipino patient who was on bed rest. And so he was told, you have to stay in the hospital bed, don't get out of the bed unless it's an emergency. So they brought him a bedpan, but they expected him to know how bedpans work in the US. In the US, you keep your bedpan by the hospital bed, you have to go potty, you use the bedpan, then you call the nurse, they come and take it away and bring you a fresh one. But they didn't explain that to him, they just expected him to know how it worked. But he's used to Asian toilets don't get cleaned as often. So he thought what they were saying is, here's your bedpan, you have to pee in this repeatedly, and it's just gonna get yucky and gross and set it next to your bed. And realistically, and I can't fault him, he said, that's disgusting, I'm not doing that. So he kept getting out of bed to try and use the toilet. Once they explained to him, like, no, it's a one-time use. You use it once, call us, we bring you a fresh one. Then he was like, oh, okay, that I can jive with that. But they had to try to explain that to him. Yes.
You actually use the bedpan? Do you like get out of the bed and squat, or do you like put it underneath you while you're laying in bed?
Valid point. I think they're probably very, very easy to use for men for peeing. And other than that, I'm not entirely sure how to use that. I've never had to, so I have no.
There's two separate ones.
Oh.
Your bedpan goes in the bed. If you are a person with a penis
Yeah.
and you have to pee, they will give you it sort of looks like a jug.
Yes. I have seen those.
Sort of go into
Certain, yeah. Go potty. Interesting. Thank you. I'm like, I've never had to use one, so that's fascinating. Yeah. Good question, because I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, the second you started to describe the jug, I was like, I have seen those. Now, what's interesting is, even with our plumbing, America has really strong plumbing. Even if you have a low flow toilet, it's still pretty strong. Many countries do not have as strong plumbing as we're used to. So in those countries, you frequently, if you use toilet paper, you do not flush it. It goes in a tiny receptacle next to the toilet. Where it can gross out Americans is, we're used to, if I go poop and I wipe, it goes in the toilet, it goes away, and I don't have to worry about it. Putting it in a trash can grosses out some Americans because we think our trash can in our bathroom, like my trash can in the bathroom, I empty once a week. If I was putting my poopy toilet paper in it, I would be emptying it a lot more frequently. They get emptied more often. I think of a friend of mine out in California. He was born on the way to the US from Vietnam. But his parents were old school Vietnamese. They physically left Vietnam in the 70s. Mentally, I don't think they ever left Vietnam. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They were just very old school. I learned this because he came over to my house, went poop, gonna tell his business. And he came out of the bathroom with toilet paper and he said, "Where do I go with the toilet paper?" And I said, "On the toilet." "Oh my God, why are you holding it?" And he said, "Well, you can't put it in the toilet." And I said, "Yes, you most certainly can. I do it all the time." And he said, "Well, don't you have a trash can?" And I'm like, "In my bedroom? Not for the poop." Like, I was very confused because I didn't know. After we had a conversation, I found out his parents were so old school that they didn't flush their toilet paper, and that's how he was raised. So then we had to have the conversation of like, "No, I promise you my toilet can handle it. Like, I do it all the time, I promise." Because I wasn't equipped for a little poopy toilet paper station. I didn't have that equipment. Where we can see the remnants of some of these practices. In the Arab world, it used to be you did not use toilet paper, you wiped with your left bare hand. Now, yeah, it's yucky. Full disclosure, they were washing their hands very, very well. Very well. It wasn't like just a quick, they were washing their hands. But because of that tradition, it became a taboo to eat with your left hand because a lot of Arab food is eaten with your hands. So the idea is, just in case you didn't wash well enough, never use your left hand to eat. And even though most Arab nations have fully functioning, wonderful toilets, there is still a tradition that you only eat with your right hand. So if you travel to the Arab world and you're left-handed, try not to eat with your left hand because you might get a couple of strange looks of people like, "You, left hand." And you're like, "Yeah, but we're not doing that anymore." Eventually, could that taboo die out and they could say, "Who cares which hand you?" Yeah, most likely as that tradition dies out, they'll probably as well. But you can still see that kind of today. Now, what's funny is, we may look down on other cultures and say, "You squat to poop? How primitive. You don't use toilet paper? What's wrong with you?" But we in America have figured out both of these. We discovered the squatty potty. Now, realistically, and I will bring this up later this week as well, please do not think I am equating babies to poop, but they come out of neighboring areas. And realistically, squatting to get them out helps open up your pelvis and it helps gravity help. So what's fascinating is, same kind of concept, but instead of us saying, "Hey, squatting to poop is actually healthier and can help you poop faster," instead of revamping all our toilets, we just invented the squatty potty to bring your knees up. We also invented the bidet. Well, we didn't, I think France did, but France is well known for it. The bidet is using water to clean your booty. If you are younger than me, which most of you are, let me explain what middle-aged looks like. Middle-aged is, instead of going out partying, your friends call you to say, "Hey, we just finished our bathroom remodel and we got an amazing new toilet. Do you want to come over and see it?" And you say, "Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, my friends redid their bathroom and they got a very fancy toilet. It has a heated seat and a bidet. I had never used a bidet before. We all came over and took turns using the toilet. We loved each other. We just would go in, come back out and give a report of like, "Oh, that's a nice toilet. Do you want to try it? You try it." And I had a moment of like, this is middle-aged. We are just coming over to try the new toilet and we're very entertained. So it was a very nice toilet. Now I have a few minutes left, so I want to talk briefly about hair. All of us, unless you have alopecia, have hair. Body hair, head hair, facial hair. Some of us may have more hair than others, but we're mammals. We all have body hair. Many cultures like traditionally long hair regardless of sex or gender. So in a lot of indigenous cultures, you have an emphasis on long hair, and it shows health and it shows belonging in the community. For many of these cultures, if they value long hair, they usually have rules around cutting it. Oftentimes in indigenous communities, babies get like a first year haircut and then never again, unless you are in mourning. I see it frequently. I didn't include any examples, but I see it frequently when I'm scrolling like TikTok or Instagram. If you're curious what my algorithm is, it's literally cats and other cultures. Like that's what my Instagram is. Very frequently, I will see somebody who is maybe Samoan, from the Polynesian area, or indigenous North American, and they have very, very long hair, longer than mine, long like this woman with the epic hair flip. She's a Bollywood actress. And then they announce that they lost their father or they lost their grandmother or somebody close to them. And then I see the mourning where they are crying, they are mourning, they are grieving, but someone is cutting off 8 to 10 inches of their hair, like a really big chunk of hair. It's a way to signify loss. Even now, a lot of Westerners believe that hair holds memory, that hair holds your life. And realistically, you grew it throughout this life. This is a way to signify, I have lost a big chunk of my life. I have lost someone very dear to me. It helps you kind of mark the occasion. I imagine it also helps with other people in the community to know you're grieving. Realistically, when we talk about grief here, and I'll bring it up this week and next, grief is rough and you go through a lot depending on who you lost. If I say work with a sick person from India and let's say it's a man and he has really, really long hair. And then one day he comes in, he's gone for a couple of days and I don't really know where he went. And then he comes in and his hair is shoulder length. If I know the history, I might say to myself, ooh, he may have lost someone. And I might be a little gentler with him of like, be patient with him. He's grieving. Grief can do weird things to people. Sometimes when people are grieving, it manifests as anger. Sometimes it manifests as tears. You can be gentle with someone if you can signify like, hey, they lost somebody. They lost somebody important to them. And they have signified that with the hair loss. I think I'm out of time. Okay, I'm gonna end there. So I will end there. I will finish up on Wednesday. What I'm gonna do is there's like literally like 2 or 3 slides. We'll finish up that and then we'll get into birth, which means the super exciting topic of death will probably be covered next week. We'll get caught up with next week. It's kind of a shorter week lesson anyway, so it'll work out. Keep an eye out. Next week I will get, I know it's not fun to think about the final already, but next week I will get you a study guide and then tell you how the final week will work. The final exam will be online unless you would like an in-person option, then you can just let me know. Otherwise, you're free to go and I will continue on Wednesday.